Good morning. I'm John Bitson, the Menard Family Director of the Sheila and Robert Challey Institute for Global Innovation and Growth. Welcome to the Human Progress and Flourishing Workshop. In this series, we bring in scholars from across the country and from NDSU to have a discussion with the NDSU community. Topics focus on innovation, opportunity, and ways to increase individual and societal flourishing. I'm really excited that today we're joined by Ahmad Al Asady. And Ahmad is one of our own. He's a Challey Institute scholar doing great work at the Challey Institute. I'm excited for you to hear from him, and I'm excited to hear from him and myself. He has a very interesting sounding topic today, what eating at restaurants around the world taught me about entrepreneurship and corruption. Ahmad Al Asady is a scholar at the Challey Institute for Global Innovation and Growth, a research fellow at the Center for Entrepreneurship and Family Business, and an assistant professor of management in the Department of Management and Marketing at North Dakota State University. He researches how institutional elements in foreign environments influence the economic decisions of international entrepreneurs. His current research interests include international entrepreneurship, institutions, corruption, and the Middle East and North Africa region. In 2022, Dr. Al Asady's paper with Dr. Christopher Groening, titled "The Contingent Effects of Firm Response Tactics on Firm Legitimacy During a Secondary Boycott," was selected for Social Issues in Management Division Best Paper by the Academy of Management. So I'm really excited about the presentation today. After Dr. Al Asady's presentation, you'll have a chance to ask your own questions. So please start thinking of questions now. And without any further delay, let's welcome Dr. Ahmad Al Asady.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Thank you so much for taking the time out of your Fridays to join me today on my presentation. And thank you to everyone at home on Zoom for tuning in. I really, really appreciate it. And before I get started, actually, I just wanted to say that I was originally scheduled to present last Friday. However, I had some surgery over spring break and I needed more time for recovery. And I wanted to thank the Challey Institute and Dr. John Bitson for being so accommodating that they were able to accommodate my request to push it. So thank you very much. And it's actually testament to that I made the right choice when I accepted the offer at NDSU 3. And so I wanted to also share with you a little sort of story. So you want to know another reason why I accepted the offer at NDSU? It wasn't the weather, right? So yeah, well, 3 years ago, I was a PhD student at Kent State University in the Department of Marketing and Entrepreneurship, and I was pursuing my PhD in business administration with an emphasis on international entrepreneurship. And 3 years ago, I flew in and I interviewed. And the thing is that in academia, the job search process is very thorough in terms of the candidate and the university. And so I was flown here, I hung out for 2 days, and I met my colleagues and I interviewed, and I flew back so excited that deep down I said, I knew I wanted to come here. And as soon as I went home and I opened the door and my wife asked me, "How was it?" I said, "I loved the restaurants." She said, "The restaurants?" I said, "Yes, the restaurants." She said, "What about your talk? What about your presentation?" I said, "Oh, that was great. I think it went great. I loved everybody, but the restaurants." And I just couldn't stop talking about the restaurants. And actually, the restaurants made such an impression on me that it took actually every ounce of will not to steer the conversation when I was sitting with my colleagues to discuss the food that I was eating. You see, I am very strategic in terms of the decisions that I make. And the way that I evaluate the place is that I actually evaluate a city by the quality of its restaurants. And not just the quality of its restaurants, but quality of certain meals. So in the 3 restaurants that my colleagues took me 3 years ago, so the Boiler Room, Beer and Fish, and 46 North, I made the clear decision to order the same meal. I ordered fish. Why did I order fish? And I actually ordered a specific type of fish that was on the menu, mahi-mahi. and it was the best mahi-mahi I have ever had in all 3 restaurants, and they all produced 3 different variations of it. So mahi-mahi is an ocean fish. We're in North Dakota, the center of the country. How many miles is it to the closest ocean? And that's testament right there to just how good, just how an impression it made. And so you may be wondering, why am I using restaurants? And so over the past 4 years, when I was a PhD student at Kent State, I just kept reading and reading entrepreneurship books. And like the old saying goes, you are what you read. You start to see things. I sort of developed this perspicacity, as if I can use the word, right? And I'm not saying in terms of the world orients itself towards the thing that you're thinking about. So it's not like you're thinking about a person that you haven't talked to in a while and then they call you out of the blue. It's not like when you're thinking about a specific car and then you start to notice it, right? It's much different than that. Your ideas, your intuition, your thoughts all go towards, entrepreneurship. And so I wanted to ask a question. How do you define entrepreneur? And this is actually a question that it's the central question of my field. How do you define an entrepreneur? Would anyone like to take a chance or shot? How do you define an entrepreneur? Is it a small business owner? Is it an innovator? So how do you define what an entrepreneur is? And second question is, why is it so important that we have to define what an entrepreneur is? So yes, Jim, do you had your hand? Please, yes. Thank you very much, Jim. So for those at home, thank you for the answer. That's actually very good. An entrepreneur is someone who creates value, right? And so the way I define entrepreneur, yes, as an individual who identifies and exploits opportunities to create value, right? So, and drive innovation and contribute to economic growth. And the key word here is value, right? Value is very, very, very important. And so the way that science happens, so economists, so for me I holding a PhD in business administration, right? So our science happens conceptually, right? So you have the hard sciences, so the biology, the chemistry, the physics, right? And these hard scientists have their instruments, right? So they have their microscopes, they have their telescopes, they have all their different types of tools that they have at their disposal to be able to observe the world, right? So a biologist, for example, will look under a microscope to differentiate red blood cells and white cells, right? So you can see that red blood cells are red, white blood cells are white. However, in our field, it's not so cut and dry, right? So it's very, very abstract. And what happens is that the inherent challenge is that for us to be able to observe the phenomena around us and to, at the same time, be able to verbalize it, to be able to explain it in a way that actually makes sense. And so in my field, there are 2 very, very smart scientists that, well, one of them passed away, but the other is still alive and well. And they basically formed the argument that still goes on today as to how do you define entrepreneur? So what does an entrepreneur do exactly? So we know that an entrepreneur creates value, right? And there's a common misconception that entrepreneurs make money, and that's not the case, right? So the manifestation of value that they capture manifests in the form of money or currency. And that's how entrepreneurs approach it. So I've never met an entrepreneur that said, I want to make money, and was successful. It's usually entrepreneurs that are passionate about a problem that they want to solve, and they use basically their business acumen and their perspicacity to be able to solve it. And through solving that, to the extent to which society values their solution, right, determines their success and the sizes of their bank accounts. And another thing is that, so if you think about the Challey Institute's mission, right? So the Challey Institute's mission is to advance understanding in the areas of innovation, trade, and institutions. And how do you do that? right? So you do that by looking at the individuals that make up these institutions. You have to go at the very, very, very bottom. You have to go where it all starts, and that's the individual entrepreneur, right? And another reason for that is if you look at all the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, right, whose products and services improve our lives and make our lives so much better. So think about the clothes that you're wearing, the shoes, cell phones, the technology, the cars that you came in, right? So all those companies were an abstract idea in someone's head, right? So think about this. Think of Apple, for example, was started by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in Steve Jobs' garage, in his parents' garage. And it makes me wonder, why didn't I grow up in a house with a garage, right? I grew up in an apartment. Had I grown up in a house with a garage, perhaps things would have been different, right? Yes, so, so if we look at Israel Kirzner's interpretation of what an entrepreneur is, right? And so my advisor, Scott Shane, and Scott, one of the grand students of Israel Kirzner. So if you think of Israel Kirzner, his relation to what I do, I think of him as my great grand advisor, if that makes sense terms. So yes, Israel Kirzner basically suggests that entrepreneurs have this special ability, right, to notice profitable chances in the market, right? So they're able to say, hey, one item costs this much, and another item costs this much, and there's a disequilibrium in the market. And so they'll be able to engage in something called arbitrage, which is buying low and selling high, right? And an example of this, think of Walmart. So Walmart, by the way, this is the front page from the St. Louis Globe Democrat from 1962. I never thought I would see the words tiny and Walmart in the same sentence, right? But if I was alive, I wasn't alive in 1962, but basically Walmart was started in 1962, and Walmart's value proposition, right? So they were going up against Kmart, against Target, which I was surprised to know that it was actually established in 1904 in Minneapolis, right? So think about this. Target has been operating from 1904, and Walmart started in 1962. Right, and Walmart's Walmart's founders was Sam Waltman. His value proposition was to be able to get items and resources to rural areas, right? And he started the idea of Walmart in Arkansas, right? And with the value proposition of basically the cheapest price all the time in order to beat out the competitors, right? And so basically he was purchasing wholesale products, right? So bread, grocery items, things of that nature, and then he was selling them in his store for profit. However, the price that he priced his prices at, his offerings at, were lower than that of the competition's, right? And so that's what basically Walmart's unique selling position was. And so this is one form of entrepreneurship, right? So where basically you'll purchase a commodity in one market, and then you sell it in another market for a profit. And so Joseph Schumpeter's basically idea of entrepreneurship is a little different from Israel Kirzner's. And Joseph Schumpeter argues that, well, entrepreneurs, no, they're not just profiteering. They're not just looking at opportunities that exist in the market. No, they actually create opportunities, right? So they are inventors who come up with new technologies. And the reason that I underline the word technologies is there's a common misconception when we think about the word technology. We think of it as a tangible tool, right? So your cell phone, your laptop, right? So we associate it with motherboards and chips and hard drives and things of that nature. When the technology is actually, no, the root word of the technology is technique, right? It's the way of doing things. So it's a practical application, right? So think about this. If you were to innovate a new way to tie your shoelaces, right? That's a technology right there. You can say that it's a technology. It's a new way of doing something, right? But it manifests in sort of in hard drives and motherboards and things of that nature. But the concept of technology is the new way of doing something. And this is very, very, very important to understand. And so their actions lead up to ups and downs in the economy, and they produce big changes over time, right? So, and they focus on shaking up industries and creating new markets. So if I was to direct your attention to the picture up here, so these are the cell phones, basically from 1987 all the way to 2000. These are basically Nokia cell phones, and Nokia at the time was the #1 cell phone manufacturer in the world. And as you can see from the picture, from 1987 to 1992 to 2000, the improvements that Nokia made were incremental, correct? See, you can clearly see from the picture. So the phones were getting smaller, right? The buttons were getting different, but they basically had the same sort of, the improvements that they made were not radical, right? So I have a question for you. Can you all take out your cell phones? Question. Anyone here has plastic buttons on their cell phones? Raise your hand. I didn't think so. Anyone here have a Nokia phone? I didn't think so. That's the perfect example of innovation, right? So Apple introduced the iPhone in 2007, and their value proposition, their technology was doing away with the plastic buttons, right? And so Steve Jobs' argument was, what if you think of a great idea 6 months from now? You can't change anything, right? Because everything is fixed in plastic. And he was thinking about software. And so what Apple did was they innovated a new technology, a new application, a new way of using the phone, right? And it resulted in and manifested in their proprietary technology, multi-touch, right? So with the screen where you're able to zoom in and zoom out, and as Steve Jobs said, it works like magic, right? And it really is. When he unveiled it, there was nothing like this before, right? And so you can see that how iPhone and Apple revolutionized the cell phone industry, but also decimated the competition, right? So yeah, so this is another example of entrepreneurship. And so up until this day, there hasn't been sort of a middle ground, right? Because I've had this conversation before with my other colleagues where I would say, okay, what is an entrepreneur? If you were to open a hot dog stand, are you an entrepreneur? If I was to start selling hot dogs, would I be an entrepreneur? I would say yes. I'm trying to capture value. According to Kerzner's sort of view is that I'm buying low and selling high. But then I have other colleagues who would tell me, no, bite your tongue. You are not an entrepreneur, right? This is not scalable. It's not going to be revolutionary, right? And so my thing is, why can't we all just get along? Why can't we find some middle ground? And so what I was thinking of, think of entrepreneurship as a spectrum. Think of it as if I see the business school 101 graph here, you have the y-axis and then you have the x-axis. So if you think of entrepreneurship on the x-axis as sort of on a continuum, where on one side you have your arbitrage, so you're buying low and selling high, and all the other side is innovation. And your y-axis represents basically how successful the endeavor is. And the maximum success is basically new industry formation. So for an entrepreneur to basically, if you were to form a new industry, that means you basically reach the upper echelons of success in terms of entrepreneurship. And so, for example, look at the firm Merrill Lynch. Merrill Lynch is an excellent example of a firm that engages in arbitrage, right? So MoneyGram is another example of a firm that basically deals in currency. So you can transfer currency from, let's say, the United States to Canada to Mexico to pretty much all over the world through MoneyGram services. And MoneyGram will take a small fee and they'll basically profit, right, from the difference of the transactions and the currency pricing from, let's say, the local market to the market over there. And that's how they capture their value. And people find that valuable, right? In order for me to remit money, for example. So if we were to look at the top right corner, you have, for example, Uber. Uber, for example, founders of Uber, they created the rideshare industry. Now, the rideshare industry, you don't know if it's good or not. The thing is that it's there, that they were able to create the rideshare industry. Tesla's another example. So Tesla, for example, they revolutionized the electric car industry. Now, whether you like the company or not, right? The fact of the matter is that they're doing very, very, very well in terms of the innovation, and excuse me, in terms of the innovation that they're doing. Facebook is another company, or Meta. I think they're called Meta now. Mark Zuckerberg and his team, right? So they actually, from 2005, they were basically the original social media platform, and they basically started the sort of the social media as we know it. And how did they capture value? Through advertisements, right? So they were using basically their user base as potential marketing targets for companies, and companies would purchase advertising space on their platform. Apple. So Apple's another company that highly innovative, created a new industry. Amazon is actually an interesting one, and you'll see that Amazon doesn't really fit with Uber and Tesla. They're a little bit, I sort of place them to the left of the scale. And so Amazon's story is actually very interesting. So Jeff Bezos, mid-90s to early 90s, late 90s, read about the potential explosion of the internet and e-commerce. And so he quit a very, very comfortable job and moved to Bellevue, Washington, and he created a business plan for what is now Amazon. And basically the company, what they did was they were selling books. So they were engaging in a form of arbitrage. So they were buying the books from suppliers at a low price, and they were selling it to their customers for a higher price, for a profit. But what was different about Amazon was Jeff Bezos was doing it on the internet, right? And Amazon billed itself as Earth's biggest store. And this is an example of fake it till you make it, right? Because to be honest, yes, he can actually claim he didn't have all the books in his possession. He didn't need to have a giant warehouse, but he was able to develop a distribution network right across the country. And it's selling, again, from his garage, right? So why didn't I grow up in a garage? But the interesting thing about Jeff Bezos and his is that, so he wasn't doing it to, again, make money. He had a vision, and it was really, really difficult for him. So I tell my students this. So imagine Jeff Bezos isn't, yes, he's an inventor. He has an engineering background, but he isn't really like a programmer, right? So we tend to romanticize entrepreneurs, thinking, yes, they were in their basements programming, right? And they were working hard, and they were overnight successes. We're seeing the sort of polished end. But what we don't see is all the challenges and the trials and tribulations that entrepreneurs go to. So imagine Jeff Bezos in 19, basically selling books. That's what he was doing, selling books. And he was basically get an order on the internet. He would take the book and he would drive in a van to the US to deliver the books, to have the books shipped out. Can you imagine his conversation with the USPS worker? Bezos, books, internet. Can you imagine how he would have felt standing in line, trying to deliver books, thinking, will this work? Will it not work? What happens if it doesn't work? I took all this money from these people. This better work, right? Because think about, I'm sure we've all stood in line at the USPS, and it's that time when I'm standing in line in the USPS that I start to think about things, right? So I'm sure that Jeff was thinking about things like that, right? So, and now we have McDonald's. So McDonald's is actually revolutionized the fast food industry, and I'll be talking about that. We have Chipotle. So they revolutionized the sort of casual dining. And then you have Walmart. And then all these sort of companies and all these entrepreneurial ventures, whether successful or not successful, they require what I call the 3 Ps. Right? So they require patience, persistence, and perseverance. It takes time, right? all these companies, it takes time. And I wish I would have added like another axis just to show you in terms of the time and how long it takes for these endeavors to actually get off the ground. And so why restaurants? Right. So I'm a foodie. I love restaurants. I've been to restaurants all over the world. And I make it a habit to I evaluate a place by the quality of its restaurants. And actually, I went online and I did some research, and I was actually very surprised. Well, the first sort of stat didn't surprise me. 63% of adults have worked in the restaurant industry, making it the nation's training ground. I myself have worked at a restaurant. Anyone here work in a restaurant at one point? Yeah, around 60% of the room. Yeah, is that correct? Yeah, so that's really cool. So, and 30% of new restaurants actually fail their first year. So 1 in 3 restaurants fail, which means the restaurant industry is brutal and it's difficult, right? And we've all seen Gordon Ramsay and Kitchen Nightmares and all those, and we're like, yeah, we can do this, or this looks so cool. It's not. It's very, very, very difficult. Right. And it requires patience, persistence, and perseverance. It requires you to really to be very passionate about what you're doing. Because if you want to make money, you're going to quit. So also, I went online and I checked out of curiosity the world's oldest businesses. Right. So I actually, in my PhD program, I read the work of Ronald Coase, and Ronald Coase actually. He did his work on the nature of the firm. So why do companies exist? Why do firms exist? And I just went online and to see what were the oldest companies in the world. And I was surprised to see that of the top 10 oldest businesses in the world, 2 of them are restaurants. One is in Salzburg Cathedral, Austria, and it was established in 803, and it's still working until this day. And they have Google reviews. Right. And the other is Mayu Qing's Bucket Chicken House in China, in the Jiangsu province. And this was established in 1153. And they're still running and they're doing very, very well. And so restaurants have been part of our economic history for as long as our economy has existed. Oh, and fun fact, I found out that the world's oldest company is actually a construction company in Japan. Which is really, it actually makes sense, because if you think about supply and demand of the economy go with the needs of the individuals, right? And so what is your necessity? It's basically housing. And so it makes sense that the first company in the world to be a construction company to build houses, right? So yeah, that's okay. So restaurants also formed industries. So as we saw, those 2 oldest restaurants in Austria and in China, and even from then until the formation of McDonald's, the restaurant industry hadn't changed much, right? And so we have here, so this is the McDonald's Brothers San Bernardino restaurant, which opened in 1948, right? And they had 9 items on their menu. So they had a hamburger, cheeseburger, soft drinks, milk, coffee, potato chips, slice of pie. And the staple of the menu is the 15-cent burger. Now, I want to ask you a question. Is there a word up there that catches your attention or makes you think that it's out of place in the pictures? Anyone? System. What system? What system are they talking about? What were the McDonald brothers thinking about when they said system? Well, McDonald's has an assembly line. Their value proposition is speed, right? And so basically what it is that it's 45 seconds from customer order until the menu items are produced, and ensuring scalability. That's what they wanted to do. Now, where did the McDonald's brothers come up with this idea of basically having a system kitchen? I wonder from where, and I did some checking. And guess what? Henry Ford with the production line, right? And so the moving assembly line is an example of technology, right? So it's not the moving parts, it's not the systems, it's not the cables, it's not the wires, it's the idea, it's the application of it, right? And so where did Henry Ford think of the idea of the assembly line, which is actually very, very innovative. And I'll talk about it in a second as what it do. But he came up with the idea from the Chicago meatpacking houses plants. And basically, what they were doing was they were disassembling the carcasses. And he thought, so the carcass would start on one line and it would be pushed to one person. One person would do one part, and then it would be pushed towards down the line, and then the third person would do their part. And basically, at the very end, the carcass would be disassembled and packaged and ready. And that's where the perspicacity and the alertness comes into play. And he thought of this, and he said, I need to do this in my plant. But why did he do it? Was it to make money? No, he actually had a very, very noble cause. He wanted to produce his cars as cheap as possible so that his own employees can afford the item that they produced. Because cars at the time were being built by hand, right? And so your average company was producing 11 cars a month. Only 11 cars a month, and they were being built by hand. And so if you think of Aston Martin and Bentley, and these companies existed at the time, they were doing niche products, sort of custom-made orders, to which they still do. And those companies did well. But Henry Ford, he wanted to revolutionize. He loved the car so much, he wanted to give everyone a chance to try it. And guess what? Naysayers at the time were saying, no, this will never work. Why do we need cars? What's wrong with horses? Horses are everywhere. There's grass everywhere. They've been tried and tested. Why do we need cars? And he basically was trying to give them as many sort of solutions and reasons to purchase a car. Well, I'm going to try to make it as affordable as possible. I'm going to try to make it as nice as possible. And with the application of the assembly line, Henry Ford basically took down the price of the Model T from $825 in 1908 to $260 in 1925, right? And that's actually amazing. And he was able to order more parts. He was also able to increase the efficiency of his warehouse, of his plant. Prior to the assembly line, he was only running 2 shifts, right? But with the assembly line, he was able to innovate and to produce the Model T in 84 distinct steps, right? And it minimized time and efficiency and increased efficiency. So rather than the workers going to the car to put the parts, the car would come to them, and he was able to hire more people. He was able to pay his employees more, and he was able to have a 3rd shift. And so he was basically running a 24-hour plant. And by that time, he was producing 2.1 million Model Ts a month, which a feat that hasn't been done all except for the Volkswagen Beetle, which came later, right? But that's just a testament to the power of entrepreneurship, right? And guess what? Society valued this so much that it was reflected in Henry Ford's bank account. And that's how you do it, by trying to add value to society. And this is one example of basically how Henry Ford took an idea from another industry and he applied it and he changed it and he applied it into his own. And that's another example of entrepreneurship. So what were the consequences of the fast food model, right? So if you think about what happens is that, so it introduced speed, efficiency, and menu standardization, menu item standardization, rapid expansion and scalability. It lowered the prices for customers. It inspired the rise of fast food chains, but it also eliminated the need for waiters and servers. And this is very, very, very important. So, and I'll talk about that. But I also wanted to show you this article about another form of the manifestation of innovation. So This is in 2022, a New York Times article. So in Jordan, mansaf in a cup creates a food controversy. So the national dish of Jordan, so Jordan's a small country in the Middle East. It borders Israel. So the national dish for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years is mansaf, and they take great pride in it. And it's basically a combination. The ingredients are rice, lamb, and there's a sort of a yogurt broth that goes with it. And this dish is associated with, you know, gatherings, hospitality, and it's usually served on a big plate, where in order to, and it basically for people to sit around the plate and to eat from the same plate. And this is basically increases camaraderie and brotherhood and all these things. And this is the way it has been consumed for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so one restaurateur came up with the idea of, instead of serving it on a big plate, let's put it in a cup and let's sell it for $1. Let's put it in a cup and sell as many as possible. And it caused so much controversy that it made it to the New York Times, right? Where this dish that was traditionally consumed in that way was actually sort of converted into this, and it became very, very, very popular. And soon after, everyone started doing it. And it actually inspired others to create variations of the dish. And we have on the right side here, so this is a take on the mansaf dish, but with a Japanese touch, and they call it sushi mansaf. And it's basically, so instead of the seaweed and the rice or the tuna, you'd have the bread, which makes the base of the dish. You'd have the rice, and then you'd have the lamb right in the middle. And instead of the soy sauce, you have the yogurt broth. It's actually, it's one of my favorite dishes, actually. But I haven't eaten it in a long time. But yeah, you should try it. If you're ever in Jordan, or if you ever go to a Middle Eastern person's house, ask them about this dish. They'll know it, and they'll tell you about it. And so one innovation that occurred with the mansaf in the cup is that it also eliminated the need for waiters and waitresses. And so waiters and waitresses and servers have actually been part of the restaurant industry for a very, very long time. And one of the sort of interesting aspects that I've observed from visiting different restaurants around the world is the tipping culture. How do restaurants tip? And how much do you tip? And why do you tip? Right? And so I found out that tips actually originally, the word tip stands for to ensure prompt service. Right? And that's one of the originations of the word tip. And if you can see that, so in different countries, they treat tips differently. So for example, in the US, the UAE, Bulgaria, Ethiopia, and Canada, tipping is encouraged everywhere, right? So you go to a restaurant, the hairdresser, the salon, barber, you know, show your gratitude for good service and tip. However, so if you go to the Czech Republic, China, Belgium, Denmark, or Finland, I would not recommend that you tip. They will not take tips. All right. So nothing will happen, but it's just they would recommend that you don't take tips. But if you go to Argentina, French Polynesia, Japan, Vietnam, Singapore, India, Rwanda, Oman, or South Korea, if you tip, you will get in trouble. It's actually very, very, very rude to tip in some countries. See, tipping is associated. So in originally, there are certain professions that didn't pay as well, right? And so they're sort of with low skill, with not necessarily low skilled labor, but they weren't just as high paying. And so that provided an opportunity, for example, to change the service or to increase the service in order to increase wages. And what happened, customer was happy, they would be more inclined to basically give a tip. But in some cultures, because of the association with low-paying jobs, it's actually it's very, very disrespectful. And so I've actually been in this situation where I wanted to tip, and a cab driver, and he looked at me and he said, "Do you think I'm poor?" I said, "No, I wanted to He said, no, I own this. This is my cab. I don't need, pay for what you pay the price that I'm asking. You don't need to tip. And if you go to Japan, in the restaurants also, they will not accept tips. They'll actually look at you in a very, because they look at tipping as a form of favoritism. Right? And what they say is that we're all working together. And if you like the food so much, you will come back for the experience. So you do not need to tip. Right. And so tipping sort of, and it got me thinking about, so, how is tipping sort of, why is it so different across the world, and especially in restaurants? And so I started to look at it as from the principal agent problem. And this is actually a common theme that entrepreneurship scholars deal with. And basically, so if you think about it, waiters help customers with ordering, eating, and ensuring they have an excellent experience. But sometimes the waiter's goal may not match that of the customers, right? So as a customer, you're sitting in a restaurant, you're going to take the waiter at their word. So is it good? Yes, it's excellent. How do you know for sure? Did they try it? Did they not try it? Now, this is the thing. It may happen on such a low level that you may not think something of it, but it actually, it has a propagating effect in society in the way that we conduct business, right? And so in a sense, I like to think of tipping, or the opportunity for tipping, as that of basically corruption, right? So if you think about it, in a sense, both tipping and corruption, they're gifts offered in conjunction with an advantageous service, whether you're in a restaurant or you're in the mayor's office, right? And the main difference is timing, right? So the tip, you basically tip after the meal, but with corruption, it's usually before, right? But it's a fair way to look at it, right? In order for you to think, and because it's an informal institution, right? So there aren't really laws that are written down that govern the way that we tip, right? So it's usually basically on your understanding of the norms and cultures, but also based on your own experience. And so there's no law that says you have to tip, but people are more inclined to. And so corruption, what is corruption, and how does it happen? So corruption happens on many levels. So it happens on the societal level, it happens on the governmental level, and also happens on an individual level. And so people with power or responsibility, they act dishonestly for personal benefits. So they take advantage of their positions. It comes in the form of bribes, thefts, or favoritism, where you're going to favor someone over someone else. And it harms society by undermining trust, fairness, and efficiency. And so ask the question, do entrepreneurs engage in corruption? Yes, they do, but not for the reasons that you think that you think of, right? So there's so many issues at play here. So if you think about it, information is central to the entrepreneurship process, right? So the McDonald's brothers were able to mechanize their restaurant based on the information that they had from Henry Ford's ability with his assembly line. And they basically took that information and they applied it in their field, right? And so entrepreneurship, if you think about it, it's the application of information. You're taking advantage of information or lack of information. And so because information is so central to the entrepreneurship process, so politicians and other individuals may take advantage of that in order to exchange information, which is valuable for money, gifts, services, and things like that. And past studies have suggested that so entrepreneurs do not just necessarily engage in corruption, but it's something that's part of the environment around them. And what happens is that they have to react to it, right? So they have no choice, and sometimes, but to try to accommodate and react. And that's where sort of things come into play. And so how do you measure corruption? So this is the World Bank. You have Transparency International. It's the world's leading authority on basically public sector corruption. And what they do is that they'll survey thousands and thousands of individuals every year all over the world to gauge the level of corruption within a country. And they've created this really cool scale where from 0, so dark red, that means the country's highly corrupt, right? So there's high corruption there, to 100, bright yellow, where there's no corruption. So it's basically no corruption at all. And that's basically the representation. So for example, if you see the US and Canada, they're around the 70 to 89%, while you have like Western European countries, you'll have them basically from the 90 to 100%. And then you have the African region over there, and then you have the South America and Australia and Central Asia. So how do you combat corruption? One solution that I've actually been reading about is the introduction of digital technologies, right? And so what do digital technologies do actually on a societal level? So what do we mean by digital technologies? Are the digital applications, right? So the internet, websites, your cell phones, your satellites, all those things can be thought of as digital technologies, right? And what they do is that they increase access to information. Right. And what happens is that when you increase access to information for the entrepreneur, it levels the playing field. Right. So therefore, the information that they would have to access through corrupt means, they would no longer have to do that, because the information, they have other ways of accessing it. And that's through digital technologies. Right. And so that's sort of one way of thing. And also it enhances accountability and technology. So there's with the new applications such as blockchain, it'll help track activities and making it harder for basically corrupt individuals to hide their actions. And so I wanted to give an example of basically the bottom-up effect of entrepreneurship. And this is a concrete example. So this is an excerpt from an article from the Governor Brandon. So he was the Governor Brandon at the time in Alabama, and Henry Ford talking about concrete roads, right? And I never thought I would read this. This is actually really, really cool, because he says, so Governor Brandon says, "I have been converted to concrete roads, believing they are the best. Good roads are of vital importance to the schools to reach the market and will do more than the former than anything else. And there's nothing like concrete for a road. It's unbeatable. I know from my own experience." So let me ask you, the people in the room, who here has experience with concrete? Okay, yes, we all have experience with concrete, right? And so why is this article up there? So Henry Ford's assembly line basically made it very, very affordable for lots of people to own cars. And there were so many cars, but the US infrastructure at the time was not ready to accommodate that many cars. And they had to go into play. And that's when they started building concrete roads, all because of the proliferation of cars through Henry Ford. And this is an example of a bottom-up positive effect of entrepreneurship that it can have on society, right? And through those manufacturing methods and the assembly line, you have trucks and you have different types of cars, and basically the automobile industry evolved into what it is today, right? And so this is actually great. And so last slide, I wanted to leave you, I found this really, really cool manifestation of the power of digital technologies, and it has on corruption, but also on the power of the human spirit and the entrepreneurial spirit. So I wanted to introduce you to Victor Cordova. So he's an 11-year-old boy from Peru, and he's actually a very, very big inspiration and a very, very big hero of mine. And the reason that's saying is that this 11-year-old boy wanted to do his homework, and he wanted to go to school. And what he wanted is that he was determined to get an education because he wanted to be a police officer, right? And he wants to fight corruption, thieves, and drugs, in his own words. The problem was, the challenge was, he couldn't afford electricity. His parents don't have electricity. He didn't have access to electricity. And I'm going to go on a limb here. I'm not going to ask, but I assume that everyone in this room and everyone watching at home has had unrestricted access to electricity their entire lives, right? Aside from the occasional blackouts, but I don't think any of us have ever thought about electricity and as to how we're able to use it. And so what he did was, because he was determined to get an education, his entrepreneurial spirit was that he took control of his circumstances, and he literally thought outside the box. What did he do? He took his bag and his homework, and he went outside, and he did his homework under a streetlight. And he did this every day for basically until the police station, through the CCTV cameras, picked up on this. And they're like, what is this boy doing? He's been coming here for over a month. What is he doing? And they zoomed in and they found that he was doing his homework. So they made a post on Facebook, and the post went viral. And a wealthy chocolatier from Bahrain saw the story, and he built his family a brand new house. And this is an example of the power of digital technologies and the entrepreneurial spirit, because 20 years ago, Facebook did not exist. Perhaps no one would have read about this. But it just goes to show you as to how digital technologies can connect us. And it just shows you just examples of other people's determinations and their persistence and their patience and their perseverance, right? And this is what being an entrepreneur is all about. And with that, I thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for an excellent presentation, Ahmad.
Thank you.
So we'll open it up to questions. Oh.
To run new software and company always kind of do the activity because cost of doing all this is so low. So are we expecting a new industry coming up from those artificial intelligence is available to everyone?
So thank you very much. That's an excellent question. So for those of you at home, the question was about ChatGPT and its potential influence on the cost of basically doing business, and whether or not you'll see that there's a new industry that it may form. And the answer is, so yes, there's certain evidence to suggest that this is the direction in which sort of technologies like ChatGPT will lead to. But it's interesting that right now there are established companies who are developing these artificial intelligence systems. And so I would think that users would associate ChatGPT or those systems with the industries of the companies that develop them. But in the case of, I think, is it OpenAI, the company that created? So yeah, in the case of OpenAI, the company that basically their whole value proposition is artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. So yes, that would be the industry forming. Yes.
It has a ability to scanning all the video, pictures, or reflecting videos. AI has a chance for all the documents, all this, and it has power to compare content to all this. It seems it's another revolution to the online shopping industry. It's become Amazon platform. But with ChatGPT there, everyone can use ChatGPT, compare the price, place your order. So it seems ChatGPT is threatening the industry. You mentioned some of those businesses, for example, Amazon business, Facebook business, all this. So when there's new opportunity come out, some of the industries could be eliminated.
Yes. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, and to go off what you're saying, and so the comment was ChatGPT's basically continued progress will leave a lot of industries obsolete, and you're absolutely correct. It will do that, but it's interesting. Only time will tell as to how that will unfold. and as to what degree and what industries will be named obsolete. So, for example, if anyone here remember the pager, right? Pager, yeah, we all had pagers at one point. My dad had a pager growing up, and I remember he had a pager, and it looked very strange. It was just basically this box, and he was so excited about it. But then the cell phone came after, I think a few years later, and it basically made the pager obsolete, right? So yeah, that's one way of looking. But I think ChatGPT will make entrepreneurship more difficult, because you'll not only have now access to information, you have the ability to repurpose this information and to analyze it using a very, very advanced machine, right? And it can give you ideas. And that's what I think. I think ChatGPT would be beneficial for entrepreneurs in terms of ideation. That's how I would see it. I don't think that ChatGPT will replace entrepreneurship in terms of thing, right? But it certainly will affect. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
So I'll ask you a question. It's a bit philosophical.
Sure.
So you mentioned several times some examples like Bezos and Henry Ford, and in passing, you kind of mentioned that they had noble motivation, and they just happened to end up making a lot of money.
Yes.
And I guess there's an implication perhaps that maybe the motivation of wanting to make money was less than noble.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask you the philosophical question, or to comment on what you think about, or how does thinking about whether or not the desire to make money is a desirable purpose for entrepreneurs to take, or I think you kind of understand.
Yes. Thank you. That's an excellent question. And the question was about the desire to make money and how it relates to basically the desire for entrepreneurship. So that's an excellent question. The way I look at it is money is value, and entrepreneurs, if they capture value, that value will manifest as money, whether they intend to or not. So, and the reason goes back to, this is actually really interesting. If you think of Price's law, so there's a scientist, excellent sort of scientist, and he came up with this law where it's basically output, Price's law of output, and he actually applied it to academic PhD students, where the average PhD student graduated with one publication. However, as with time, he realized that a person's output, or a company or an industry's output, is basically the 50% of that output is made by the square root of the number of individuals or companies that are participating in that industry. So if you think about this, if you take a sales team in one company of 25 people, right? According to Price's law, 5 people, so the square root of 25 is 5 people will be responsible for 50% of the output in that division. And then the square root of those 5 people will be responsible for further 50% output of that. And that's actually, and that law has been sort of tested, and it's been held across all industries. And the reason being is just that with time, and the more output you produce, more people will basically give up and they'll quit. And you'll find yourself with time that you're at the top of the industry. And what happens is that when you're at the top, that's where all the value goes. And there's a saying that if you were to take all the money in the world right now, and evenly divide it. So if we were to start over and evenly divide it across everyone, where everyone in the world had the same amount of money to start with, in a few years, the money will end up right exactly where it was intended. And this is because of Price's law, right? And so that's sort of to explain it. So that's the connection there in terms of the desire to make money and value. And if you're part of the square root, one of the people, the square root of Price's law, you're the one that's going to be basically capturing all the value in it. And that's with McDonald's, that's with Henry Ford, right? That's basically with Jeff Bezos and all these individuals. And the thing is that they were passionate about something, and they waited for the wave, right? And usually entrepreneurs these days, I feel that instead of they're passionate about the wave, they're not passionate about something. They're always chasing the wave, and that's where failure happens. When instead you should be passionate about something and develop yourself, and when the wave comes, it'll carry you to basically the top of Price's Law. Yeah.
We have time for one question.
Chat question that made me think of more things. So it turned out OpenAI did not invent the chatbot.
Mm-hmm.
It's been invented by any other organization. They were sitting on it because the potential for harm. We're just releasing it to the wild.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so I guess if they started in the industry, right? They didn't want a revolution. Revolutions don't always go well.
You're right.
And so considerations that entrepreneurs need to think about, and when does that discussion need to happen? Is it before you invent the thing? Is it before you become successful? Is it after you become successful? When do you think about the harms, the potential harms of having revolution?
So thank you. That's an excellent question. And the question was thinking about the right time to consider the implications of the unintended harm when it comes to revolutionizing industries, and when is it the proper time to have those conversations, and what type of conversations would you have? And that's a very excellent question, specifically that it has to do with ethics, right? And an ethical person, I guess, is a person who's self-governing, right? And I always say, think of the shopping cart test, right? So are you one of the people who are gonna return the shopping carts to its proper place once you're done with it, without being told to do so? Or are you one of the people that leaves their shopping carts thinking, it's okay, someone else will pick it up, right? So that's that's one way of looking at it in terms of being ethical and self-governing. But when it comes to revolutionizing industries, I think it's not down to like one person, or like, for example, or those, as you mentioned, those people that created the chat GBT. I guess it's when different interest groups and especially powerful people in terms of think tanks and organizations, when they see that there's value, that's when you've convinced them to jump on board, right? So Henry Ford would not have gotten an article with the governor had he not been Henry Ford, right? And so it's very interesting and it's very dangerous time to be in. But I think that with just being positive and knowing that, I think things will work out at the end. Things always seem to, the market corrects itself as it is. Thank you for the question.
Thanks. We're out of time, and you'll have a chance to ask Ahmad your own questions afterwards. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone at home. Thank you.